this is an opportunity to turn the concerns that have been raised all day, and if you want, over the course of the last few days in the St. Gallen Symposium, over which we have no control, but we'd love to participate in making it more diverse in the future, if that's what you want us to do. But this is an opportunity for us as a group to think back over the issues that have been shared and the concerns that have been raised, and to find a positive action for us as individuals. As Alexander said, you know, there's privilege and privilege to be at one of the most esteemed business schools on the planet Earth in one of the most beautiful countrysides in the world, with a group of outrageously dedicated, smart, and articulate people, is a position of great privilege for all of us. And we created this room with a view to not putting people on stage, although I'm standing slightly above the rest of you. I spent most of the day standing with you, and we spent most of the day listening from you and less of the day listening to us. But now is a chance for us to actually create a plan together about how we can, point by point, address some of the challenges and opportunities that we've identified together. So if you think about a proposal that might be achievable, you are the leaders of either today or tomorrow. You are the people who are maybe activists now, will continue to be activists. Maybe you'll be politicians. Maybe you'll be start your own schools. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is our opportunity to establish an agenda for change. And so with that in mind, I'm going to start the conversation with really a kind of synthesis of what we've heard over the course of the day. And I'm going to invite Upcar to present a bit of a synthesis, which we can respond to or disagree with. And then we're going to come back to the room for, as I said, action items that we can take forward. Upcar.
Thanks, Marty. I will try to do a bit of a synthesis about the various topics that were discussed, and I think what we found today was an incredible wide range of topics and issues that were discussed, and as Charlie said, certainly no clear agenda of where the direction and the topics were going. So I took a couple notes as we were going, and let me maybe touch on a few key things that might help to frame the conversation about what action plan and what proposal might emanate from the follow-on discussion. So one of the things I heard clearly and loudly was that language is very important. And we started off with a concept of inclusivity, and people struggle with that concept as whether that was even the right word, inclusion, whether that was the right word. And so the first key item that I took away is that we need to be very conscious, very deliberate, very thoughtful about what language we use to define what terms. And when we say inclusion, who is that really including and who is that really excluding, or does it force an exclusion? The second key thing I heard was that we can't talk about certain things like inclusion or citizenship without actually putting into the conversation in a very meaningful and deliberate way the whole concept of power and what the power structures are, and how do we share, or how do we give up, or how do we do something related to the power structures that are underneath the systems that we either live by, either we uphold, we reinforce, or we actually proactively or passively somehow try to change in some way. So the intermingling then of inclusion and power structures and the systems of power needs to be addressed and in a material way. The third thing I heard was that perception is really, really critical. We talk about both, in many ways, identity and expression of identity, but what the perception of identity is, what expression leads to people's perception, and that comes to the fore based on what we choose to call ourselves, how we interact with others, and what we bring to the table, both physically, both in terms of how we act and what we look like. So the aspect of perception was the third key thing. The next key thing, and I'm trying to frame it, Marty, just to 3 or 4 key things, was really about talking about, I'm just trying to think about the, I might just stay with those three as being three, unless, Marty, do you want me to just solicit anybody else? Did anybody else feel any other theme was really, really prominent? We did talk about various actions, including the last series of actions about stopping, listening authentically and actively to people who aren't at the table or who have not had a voice at the table. But is there, Marty or anybody else, is there any key themes that came up that I think I may have missed? Because Marty, do you want to summarize three or?
Yeah, no, I think you've done a great job. I mean, I do think this notion of power to the people, which came up over and over again, particularly later in the day, was particularly compelling. So I do think now is the time to go back out to the audience and ask for specific interventions. You're the minister, you're the prime minister, you're the secretary of state. What's the first new change you want to introduce based on what you've heard today or what you haven't heard today? Who's first?
We have Victoria right here.
Good.
Hello, my name is Victoria. Stand up. Okay. I'm a young, obviously, white, blonde girl. It's very easy for me to do anything, go anywhere I want. In high school, I had a friend from Ethiopia. Her name was Tamaj, one of my best friends. She transferred from the public high school to a Catholic high school, which I attended. And our religion teacher, we were taking world religions. And at the time, I was very naive, and I didn't see it, that he was blatantly racist. Sad that my parents, and now me, after turning 18, pay taxes to our Canadian government to pay a teacher who was teaching students how to be racist. I think we need to start right where it hits home. We need to filter our educators to educate the future. Should be our first plan, is to filter educators to educate future generations to be kind and accepting, and maybe we can change the future one by one in our classrooms with young students.
Marty, I've got some people over. Hello. Hi. Over here, we've got Riz. I'm going to put Jason on the spot as well. But let's start over here.
Thanks. So I'm just thinking also about how education is given, so in terms of history, and I think that's more useful for most European countries, because I find, the stories or how you learn about things like colonialism. You talk about the language again, pacification of the native population. Millions died through that. One of the ways is to educate people about what happened, so that by the time you see somebody who is coming from Africa, wherever it is, you kind of have an idea of the past, And then at the individual level, I do think it's important to listen. And I also think it's important to be ready to be uncomfortable. So the way we said that, you ask someone to dance, maybe you fall down, maybe you step on their toes, maybe they step on your toes, but it's having those difficult conversations and the authentic ones. That's really hard, but you have to do it. We all have to.
Thank you. Well, I just, wherever we're going, I just wanted to highlight that it's interesting. Our first two comments are about education and about educators. And here we are at a university, which is not young, old, which has been educating forever. And so if in your comments there's something that, and of course this is a university that is educating business leaders of tomorrow. We were at great lengths over the course of the day to identify that diversity, which is a fact, not a choice, but it is actually happening. Our societies are becoming more diverse. We made the business case that this is actually positive for shareholder value and for social value. And nevertheless, we continue to have this conversation in the context of this business school. So I'd like to, maybe if there are comments related to the manner in which business can be differently taught at this school and elsewhere, that'd be helpful too.
Okay, it's Riz Khan again. Thank you, actually. That's a perfect lead-in because I must say, it's just one of those things. If we look around, the whole world is pretty much in this room. Colors, sorry. Yeah, I'm used to holding a microphone like this. Yeah, it's like very... maybe I won't send these to the BBC and CNN.
You're meant to be uncomfortable here.
Sorry?
You're meant to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, I'm a little bit uncomfortable because the trouble is, it's like we're talking to the converted. We wouldn't be in this room if we didn't have an acceptance of the need for change, if we didn't actually sit in such a diverse crowd. It's already here. But the sad part is, as a journalist, we cover stories of so many things where it's people talking to the converted, and we seem to miss out the people who need to be in the room, in the conversation. In terms of the business school, one of the key things is, it was brought up in... by Philip Jennings of the labour groups, the unions. He said, get rid of shareholder value. It's become the most corrupt phrase on the planet. It's totally corrupt because who are the shareholders mostly? They're not the people who have, who get something out of it personally. It's an increase of the wealth of the really wealthy, the exclusivity of those who need to be looked after. I mean, one of the first things we should start doing, let people make tons of money if they start businesses and so on, but stop, I'm sorry, I know there's bankers in this room, but stop paying bankers a fortune for screwing up banking. Let businesses make tons of money, but education is the key, and let those people being educated know that if they make that much money, they have the power to do something different. Let's start calling up billionaires from today and saying, do something good with your money, you don't need another yacht, Sorry, I just...
Hi, thank you. So I think what we're really hearing in the room, and I don't want to be, not everybody can be a prime minister, one person can be a prime minister, but each and every one of us can recognize that actually inclusion is not a fuzzy feeling about us holding hands. It is painful. It is about redistribution. It is about challenging your identity and what you hold dear. And really, privilege is blind. And I think that if you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like discrimination. And so my challenge to all of you is get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because we need to start there. Thank you.
Promise, this will be the last. All right. I come from the development sector, and the development sector seems to be like a dark, shady, murky place of governments, corporates, and non-profits. But the worst thing I see and feel about it is this sort of need for us to tell people who are actually on the ground, who are living the marginalization, what they should do to improve their lives. It's absolute nonsense. I mean, just ask. That's I'm just sick and tired of really rich people telling poor people how they should, get better, work hard, and live a beautiful life. They can just stop meddling. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Is it me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I know one phrase that we've sort of been throwing around a lot is, how about we get voices on the table? And I think we should actually take that like as a practical thing, actually get voices to the table. So I was recently at an African development conference, and I was at a panel on women's empowerment, and one of the ministers of finance there was speaking about a recent policy that they had implemented, and they were going to send a few delegations to New York where they were going to be discussing women's empowerment, particularly for women in rural areas. And they had instituted a policy that said for every delegate that was going to be going to New York, they were required to bring a woman from a rural community with them to join them at that delegation where they're going to be discussing women's empowerment. And I think something practical like that, and the phrase that was used over and over again during that conference was, nothing about us without us. And I think if we can take that very seriously, I think we can actually start seeing more voices at the table. And then, so that's kind of at a more large scale, but I think even at a smaller scale, I've been in several just random meetings where you know, a woman or even myself as a person of color say something, and it's, you know, it's not acknowledged immediately, and then someone else says the exact same thing that I just said, and then all of a sudden, wow, brilliant idea, you know, thank you for your contribution. So I think even in moments like that, how do you make sure that even in a small way that people's voices at whatever table you're in are like genuinely being recognized as valuable and just as important as anyone else on the table?
Great, thank you.
So I suppose I'll elaborate a little bit on the comment I made previously. You encouraged some specific suggestions for the University of St. Gallen and perhaps the business school. So I think one very interesting example might be to think a little bit about the essay competition that I think some people in the room are part of. I didn't submit an essay, so I'm not fully aware of the process. But I thought it was interesting to see that on both days when we saw the finalists, of course, they were all men. We saw the finalists from the essay competition that was done for the symposium. This is the Leaders of Tomorrow. For Gallen. So I think on the first day, I'm not fully aware how we selected the ones on the first day, but we voted. Yes. Can I? Yeah.
There was 42% women, I think, entered out of the 1,208 essays. It was 5-stage blind. We didn't even, as a judge, I didn't know who the winners were by name or anything. I just knew the essay. So it's actually, and we did discuss it, and we all felt bad that it was guys.
Yeah, yeah. So I think, and I'm aware that it was a blind competition, and so of course it's a tricky case. So I wonder, but I did wonder if that was random, and I did wonder what the effect might be on young women studying business in the audience to feel that, you know, these are the leaders in our field.
Well, you feel the same about winning twice, which is worse.
Yeah, exactly. So I was just wondering how random that was, and whether there could be some critical reflection on how that may have happened. And I also don't know if it's reflective of the various years.
Sorry, again, just quickly answer that, because
just
we did think about not letting people enter more than once.
Yeah.
But they said it's a free and open contest.
Sure.
It was totally random. That's, I mean,
yeah.
As much as everyone felt guilty, it was totally random.
Yeah. If I can just finish real quickly my thought.
Yes, let her finish, please.
Thank you.
This is like a classic example of what happens.
This is an example of people talking together in a big room and taking turns.
So I don't necessarily have the answer. I guess I'm just wondering, you know, if it would be interesting to have some more critical reflection on perhaps how the question is phrased, what the institutes are that are being approached, and how we're evaluating language, both men and women, what kind of phrasing we understand as good writing, you know, and whether it might be an interesting case for us to think very critically about our own biases potentially.
One question I had for the panel, just the jury, is I don't know, based on several things the winners won, but if you come from Germany or Australia or the US, you will have an easier time to write a beautifully written essay than if you come from Nigeria or Nepal or Colombia. So I wonder what are the criteria, but it's easier for somebody from an English-speaking country to win that contest, probably.
I don't think it's that so much because, again, the judges are from around the world, and the judging done through stages involves a lot of people from around the world. If you notice the winners we've had in the past, we've had people from certainly non-English backgrounds. The thing I felt guilty about was doing the presenting voting, and I said that because it's a bit unfair with the presenting. Some people are naturally good presenters, and I think it's embarrassing. But I would honestly, we all reflected on this, but it's totally random. That's the weirdest thing.
All right, sure. I'm gonna use my host elbows again. I don't think we want to pick apart the essay competition in detail. There are opportunities to provide that feedback, and I think it is valid. However, there are other ways that we can look at inclusion as well. So it is completely legitimate, and I think there are real challenges to unpick here. Let's also look at other ways. This gentleman here has been waiting very, very patiently.
Yes, hello. My name is Nicholas. I come from Greece, which is interesting because I'm 26-year-old, and I've lived through a period of time when I was younger, everything was, for my country, in Europe at least, everyone was, yeah, you're nice, you have a nice food, we like feta, we like the islands. And then suddenly I was lazy, I didn't work, I was owning money, and I had friends in Germany living there for 10 years. Their landowners asked for advance in the rents, despite having stable jobs in Germany, because Greece was in trouble. And I want to say that after that, I went and worked with refugees in Greece, and I saw an underlying issue, an underlying problem in all of that inclusion discussion that we talk, and it's the dissemination of information and how people were afraid of what they did not know, they don't know, and how I saw in different parts, in completely different regions, for completely different things, that people didn't know stuff that was available, but not really available. And my solution, my first thing that I would do if I was a prime minister, would be to rework how news are disseminated, how accessible it is for everyone to get nice and objective information. So, because our democracy is based on the assumption that we all have access to the same amount of information as markets in the capitalistic society are, that we have access to the same kind of information. And if we don't, we cannot hope for a democracy that works or inclusion that includes everyone. And the second point, and last, I also study here, so I guess I have an opinion about why does this business school operates like that, and how can we make it a bit better. My main problem is all my teachers are white males and coming from Germany or Austria or Switzerland, and they, not that it's bad, there's an orthodoxy on how business should be done and should be conducted. And this, it's funny thing, I have a class called Corruption in Sub-Saharan Africa, but it's taught by a professor who is a black coming from Africa, but it's so apparent that he's not included in the way that this school conducts how they conduct business, how they teach the material. He doesn't know the loops that you have to go through in order to let everyone talk and write their essays and all that. And I see that we have this kind of orthodoxy going in this school, which creates an echo chamber between men, white men, coming from specific privileged region, that if it doesn't change, it won't be any kind of change on how the school, or any business school for that reason, can include more people and more opinions. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Lucas from Germany, and talking about inclusion, I think what we always forget is acknowledgement as well. And I can tell you like a short personal story. I did a buddy training, like a language exchange, with a Syrian refugee in Germany, and he was back home electrician, and he was really a good electrician. Like he did a lot of like big projects within his company. When he came to Germany, he spoke within 8 months like fluent German, what is quite impressive as one side. And then he wanted to work and he wanted to do something to contribute to society because he was able to, and he was not allowed to do it because they didn't acknowledge his education, what he was able to do, just because it's from Syria and it doesn't have like the same papers than we have here in Germany or wherever. And even the same happens in Europe. And that's like, sometimes I feel that in Western countries we believe that our education is the best and no one else can have like the same level. Whereas if you look, for example, to Iran, like they were much more progressive than a lot of countries in Europe, and now it's kind of like, oh, well, you come from this country, so your education is like whatever. And I think this acknowledgement is something that we have to take as well in the companies, plus like in the government and in the education system for real, because it's excluding a lot of workforce that really want to contribute, and in the end you stand there after 2 years of not being allowed to work with your skills, and you're like asking yourself, what should I do in the society? I really want to, but they don't let me. And then, well, it goes from there somewhere else.
Okay. Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm from Canada, living in Montreal. No, the government didn't make us all be here today. On the point of, I think, just going back to one of the first points on shareholder, like redistribution of wealth. I think, especially coming out of, we're in the sort of the wake of the conference and talking a lot about artificial intelligence. And I think one thing that we completely kind of overlooked actually at the conference was the history of AI and the history of these ideas. And that, I mean, Switzerland has a really good history and an interesting one. It's out of Lugano with Jürgen Schmidhuber. And what's really important about that, because essentially some of his codes in probably almost all of your phones, is that it started out of something that was non-proprietary. This is open source. And that's super important in terms of sharing ideas, collaborating on ideas, being able to have access to ideas. And so when we talk about redistribution, and kind of also Nicholas's point about really sharing of information, like this, we can leverage technology to do it better, to do it faster, to make sure no matter where you are in the world, you have access to it in different ways. And I think that's just a really important point on collaboration. Also means changing the way that we actually look at what belongs to us. So whether it's shareholder value or propriety or even something like inheritance, really taking all of what we get and re-questioning why it comes to us in the first place. Thanks.
Yeah, I have the mic. Right, I think I agree with most of the points that have been put out, that we listen to other stories and we acknowledge those different points. And in addition to that, I'd like to encourage that if you are in a position of decision making, you take a moment to reflect on your next step. See, if you're a journalist, you take a moment to think about that story that you're going to write about the female astrobiologist. Because what you write about her will then have an impact on whether she continues working or not, and how many people get motivated and inspired to go into that field. It's the same as, I'll give you a quick example. There was a story that was written about me when I joined Parliament. It said it was myself against a man. So for the gentleman, it was written, so-and-so eyes plans to conquer this constituency. And then for me, it was Genuendo plans to seduce. Right? So it is those narratives that you spread about those that are maybe marginalized that decides or determines whether they continue, how many people join that space or not. Right? What you decide to write, especially for journalists, how you decide to write about those groups that feel or that are traditionally excluded can have a great impact. And then the last part here is, after you listen, open the door. Open the door, because just listening and leaving is not going to change someone's life. If you just listen to that story that they grew up in poverty, they still don't have anything to eat, and you say, I understand, it's because of our history, thank you very much, bye-bye. It's not going to change anyone's life. So if you are once again in that sieving process, you have an opportunity to call someone for an interview, do so. Don't make fun of people's names, because that has a great impact on whether or not you're going to call that person for an interview. And if you see it and it's written Chidinma Adicheke or whatever, and you call your colleagues and you start laughing at her name, you're not going to call her for an interview. So the next time you're put in that position, consider opening the door for that person based on their qualifications, of course, if they qualify, but don't just shut them out because they have a funny name. And the same applies for conferences. I'm very aware of that UN conference. They said bring a woman from the rural area. You're going to bring her, you're going to take her to New York. It's going to be a cold experience for her. And she's going to go back to the reality of not having anything to eat. Because you've given her the exposure, but you haven't necessarily opened the door to opportunity. And I think what's very important, something that affects everyday life and livelihoods, is opening doors for real life impact. So for jobs, for income basis, for businesses, that's where it's really vital. And I can give examples of how, as a minister, I'm working on that. But then, I might disclose some things that we're still working on. But what's important and what I have pledged to do is to go to the areas that my previous ministers didn't go to. Because those SMEs in the furthest places in my country also need the ear of a minister and needs for us to make policies that are relevant to those people and the very furthest corners of my country. So I encourage all of you to take responsibility to opening that door of opportunity and exposure. Thank you.
Three quick things. Number one, I'm not a journalist, but I spend a lot of time on social media. And I only talk about things that I do, and I realize now that that's pretty ridiculous, because there's incredible people in this room, one of whom sitting beside me, who's done some phenomenal things. And the people that follow me on social media are pretty similar to me, and they've had experiences like mine. So I think it's time that I can share those different stories of things that I've learned and also actively seek them out and share them on my platforms so they can be disseminated in even a smaller way. So that's a tangible thing that I'm going to take away from this, and I encourage others to do the same. Second comment, I'm Canadian as well. I went to Queen's Commerce. For those who don't know, that's a very fancy, very expensive business school. We also talk a lot about being innovative. Well, it's been pretty clear through this conference, and I'm thankful for the conversations we've had about knowing that maybe the systems that we're living in right now aren't totally foolproof. Shareholder value, as discussed, is not the best way. Why is it in business school that we never talk about what's really deeply wrong with business? And ethics is kind of a throwaway class. That's how it felt to me as a student. So for those who are in decision-making powers in spaces that see themselves as business schools and try to be innovative and really do build the leaders of tomorrow, I encourage you to have the courage to have different types of conversations that may be less popular. Third comment, when a system leads to an outcome that we're not thrilled with. So there's many potential examples of that, but one was raised today about the essay competition. Then perhaps it's an opportunity to also, it's always good to be revisiting and knowing it's good that we're upset about an outcome of something, but I'm very thankful for the space that's been given to consider if we don't like an outcome, what can we do to change it? Thank you.
Thank you.
So my name is Vivian. I'm also from Canada, Vancouver, Canada. I have a very short point to make about not only businesses, but also from my personal experience, public sector as well as many other sectors can adopt, and that's concrete. And I think it's valuing the different types of leadership, especially for women leaders. And that is something, maybe it's just from an Asian perspective, but from my culture background, we're not used to being very, very super outspoken and to really be in the public eye, and that's often seen as something very strange because in China, in our traditional cultures, everyone wants to conform, and that's part of the communist ideal too. But I think one thing I learned in the past year working in Asia is that many female leaders, if they exist in the industries, many of them want to project a very, very strong, a masculine exterior. And I had this conversation with some few participants today as well, that people tend to dress more masculine or appear very aggressive and take on this sort of characteristic to make them feel very strong. But at the same time, many of the traditional feminine archetypes, which I don't like to use that word, but those sort of different types of leadership sometimes it's not as valued. And especially I think that is a barrier for female leaders, because if one is strong, assertive, then many people will say, oh, she's a bossy woman of color, or she is, she's this and that, she's a man or something. But if she's not assertive enough, if she's too negotiable, and if she's too, agreeable, then that will be another set of judgment to be like, oh, she's not assertive enough, she's not qualified to be a leader. But I don't think that's the same standard exists for men, and I do think different types of styles of leadership should be valued, and we're already doing that today in this forum, and I think in many of our spaces, but I don't think that has perpetuated in many other different cultures and countries in the world. So I'd like to also echo that.
We've got.
Yeah. So hi, Jason. Just one very quick observation on the 5. I have no particular interest in it, but just remember, 5 different countries, 5 different universities, 5 different native languages, different mother tongues, on 3 different continents. So there is diversity. May not look like it, but if we look a little bit beyond on the 5 finalists that we saw, it is different. The other thing is we've been talking in these very kind of vague ways that we have dissatisfaction with the way power is distributed. And how many CEOs are there for the Institute for Canadian Citizenship? 2. 1. 2?
Sorry.
There's 2 CEOs.
2 co-chairs.
Okay, so there's 1 CEO with presumably some kind of ultimate decision-making authority. And there's presumably 1 Governor General of Canada at a time, and there's 1 President of Penn International. That's just the way organizations are structured. Whether it's large or small, there's going to be a concentration of power. So we can swap someone else out in that seat, but it's still just going to be 1 person making those decisions. So I'm going to violate the spirit of what we were supposed to be doing here and coming up with solutions, but tying it back to what we learned over the last 2 or 3 days, a potential way forward is if companies are becoming a little bit more fragmented with the rise of technology, the rise of independent work, we can argue whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. Instead of having 1 organization with 10,000 people at the bottom and 1 at the very top making the decisions, we might end up with 1,000 or so organizations that have roughly 10 people in them, but 1 person at the top of each of them making decisions. So that could be a way forward, possibly, to democratize some of this power to actually make decisions, potentially.
Cool. We are officially out of time. But there are people who've been waiting to speak, and I wouldn't mind if we go over by 4 minutes. I know there's a comment there that's been waiting to come up. If we do 4 comments, 30 seconds each. Then we'll wrap up.
Hello, I'm Hiroto from Japan. I'm not sure if I can make it 30 seconds, but Japanese people.
Scott is going to come over.
As many of you know. Sorry. So Japanese people really speak up in this kind of place. I'd like to talk about this inclusion from Japanese people's point of view. Japanese government is notorious for not accepting refugees, and there are many reasons for it. But one of the main reasons, in my opinion, is the fear towards something that we don't know. And especially Japan has been closed country, and still geographically, it's like isolated. So it's not like racism. We are kind of afraid of something that we don't know. So it applies to Japan very well, but it might apply to other countries as well. So I'd like to make a point that the first step we might take is to get to know the people or something that you don't really know. And another thing I want to make shortly is Japanese society is trying to change. Like, if for now we are not really good in English, and like also for some people from Asia country, we have some trouble in like communicating with the Western people, and I sometimes feel kind of isolated in this community. Partly because like I don't really have good ability in English, but Japan is trying to change. Like, we start English education from earlier age, and we try to send more people to the foreign countries. So I'd like you all to ask, like, when you see Asian or like people from Asia or Japan, please welcome us.
That was good. Thank you. Pierre and Maria and you, and then we'll be done. Go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stefan. I'm from Belgium. I
I would like to answer the question that was asked immediately in the beginning of this session. What would you do if you were to become prime minister or president of your country? And my answer would be very short: step down and give the power away, not just once, because if I do that once, of course, well, there's nothing that will really change, but use the power that you have in that moment to give many other people that, because of the system being biased in favor of people with privilege, trying to change that towards a system that has, that kind of counteracts this bias. There are many interesting ideas. If anyone is interested, I would love to talk about it afterwards. I will not do it now because then I would take way more than 30 seconds. But essentially, really not just getting people along that aren't privileged, but actually giving them the power to decide and not saying, okay, you maybe advise me, I listen to you, but in the end I make the decision. No, you talk, you think, and you make the decision instead of me.
This is something that I feel that we, we talk about like people from our developing world. For example, I would say Iran or Pakistan or all those countries when the government might have very different relationship, international, but its citizens are suffering, and when we apply with those passports, we never get the visas or we don't get to travel. And I feel that traveling is very important for us to open up our minds, because I'm an athlete. If I was stuck in my village or in my area, I think I would have been the same, and I might thought everyone is against me, or everyone against Muslim, or everyone against, they think we are terrorists. But when I traveled, they came to know about me and I came to know about them. So traveling is very important, but because of our government, Pakistan or Iran or all those, they can't travel because the citizens who are innocent, who don't agree with their governments, you would know what's happening in Iran. But the thing is that they don't get to visa, and their visas are rejected without even paying attention. So what can do those people in power, or those countries like European countries who are more in stronger position, and they can make a lot of changes to those kind of things. And then we see UN. UN is a platform where we think that they're the champions of human rights, but look at this. I would say it's a hypocrisy, or it's a dishonesty when everybody makes amazing speeches. I've been to the UN. They talk amazing speeches. You would cry. Trust me, you would cry. And then I don't see that actually it is similar to their actions. Their actions are not the same. So you see Saudi Arabia is in the Human Rights Commission. So you look at that. So how people are going to develop that trust? So those countries who are actually in stronger position, France, Germany, America, or Canada, England, all those countries, Australia, when they are stronger, all those very white countries, very much in strong position. If they can actually bring change to that, first Saudi Arabia make change to your country and then be in the Human Rights Commission, we will accept that. If we have some kind of criteria that people gain trust in these countries too, at the same time gain trust in the UN, I think things will start getting better in the other areas too.
Thank you. Last word, Argentina, 30 seconds.
Okay, like a tweet. I hear a lot about communication and social media, so I'm going to say what I tell to my students of journalism. Social media is like technology. You can use it for good or for bad. So try to think how you can impact on other people through social media. And as I am the last one, and we are talking, but we have also to act, I would like to do an invitation. We have a beautiful nature outside to take photos for social media. So my invitation is to take a photo of another person and tell her or his story in your social media, to start giving voice to other people and not only about what we do, what we eat, or what we are so great people on the social media. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. I just want to invite the Ambassador of Canada, Susan Bicolati, to say final word before we leave you today. Susan?
Yeah, thanks.
Ambassador?
Yeah, it's okay. You can call me Susan. Well, I won't prolong. I'd like to propose two things if I were Prime Minister. and please don't repeat this, okay? Walk the talk. So I'm a little biased because we kind of walked the talk in Canada. In 2015, when Prime Minister selected his new cabinet, we had gender parity, 50-50, women, men. One of the most important ministers in the cabinet is, well, you know as a journalist, Chrystia Freeland, Minister of Foreign Affairs. Our chief scientist is a woman. Our new Governor General, Julie Payette, former astronaut, is a woman. And if you've heard our Prime Minister speak in Canada or internationally, he's just like a broken record. It's all about women. It's all about gender. It is something that he feels, and this government feels, extremely seriously about. So walk the talk. And this is not just in speeches, but also in real things. They've increased the taxes, and this is not about women, but they increased the taxes on the 1%. Again, we talk about redistribution. And this was part of their platform, and they did that. Okay, maybe you'll think it's not fast enough, it's not enough, period, but it's happening. We've elongated the maternity leave, and the paternity leave is now there too. So again, the budget, the last budget in Canada, has a gender based analysis lens. And again, it is about everything has to be looked at through diversity, equality, and gender. So I think it's important for a prime minister or a president or any leader in a company to actually walk the talk. We talked about objectives, we talked about goals, quotas, etc. But they also have to be repeated. I've had a great time here today. Going from high emotion to very conceptual discussions, intellectual, and it's all very human. And I think it's great. But I think we need to make sure that we have one or two things that we want, as we have done today, one of two things that we want to bring with us and implement. The only bad thing that I would say is that we're talking to the converted, and we've heard that before as well. And so we need to talk to the dissenters. What's happening around the world today, whether it's in Europe with the rise of populism, whether it's, you just have to watch some, and I'm not talking necessarily about CNN, but some other media outlets, it's there and it's real. We need to talk to the people who do not think like us. I think we need to make sure that they understand, and John Ralston Saul said it's about the fear. Well, it is about the fear, so how do we handle that? It's by explaining, educating, discussing, conversing. We can't just simply say, well, we all know what we're talking about, therefore we're right. No, it's about other people too. And the gentleman there was very funny but very real in terms of saying, hey, come on. Go and see how the other half lives, or the other 99% lives before you tell them what to do. But I think it's important. And business schools, I agree, have to change as well, because they have to start thinking about the disruptive elements, the human stuff that will have an impact on our society, and businesses have a definite role to play on that. So I will say, RPM does town halls. He has town halls. He stands up there and he gets bombarded with questions, and it's really tough. But he does it. Do you think he likes it? No, but he does it. And I think that's very, very enlightening about what Canadian values are and how Canadians perceive their role internationally and domestically. So I'm rah-rahing about Canada. It's also part of my job, but it's also because it's a great country. And if you guys want, to come over, let's have a party.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Some final words. Thanks to our onstage team. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Upcar. Thank you, John and Adrian, for guiding us through this day. Thanks again to the Coffee House hosts from this morning and our 360 speakers, Zabine Hergy, Peter Voser, Yolkendi Valdez, Aya Chebi, Alexander Dirksen, Alicia Cromer for participating. And thank you all for staying with us on this beautiful day. I'd like you all to acknowledge that this entire event was put together essentially by 3 people, all of whom are standing. I mean that actually they're on their feet despite not having slept for days. Jean-Rudolph Linder, Scott Young, Aisha Jara, thank you so much for your work on this. I love the idea of doing social media out on the lawn with those flowers. I'm serious. If you have time, please join us. We'll take some pictures down there. I do need the final 360 people back here for a photo. And before we end the day, this is a collaboration, the first collaboration between the St. Gallen Symposium and 6 Degrees. It was the result of Scott's friendship with Rolf Bachman, who came to 6 Degrees in Toronto last September and said, you have to come and do this as an adjunct to our symposium. We were flattered and honored, Rolf, and we have also been enormously appreciative to you and Biat and Dominic and Jean-Rudolph for allowing this to take the shape it did and being patient with us. It's not that easy to take things abroad like that. For instance, this is by far the best stage we've ever had, and we have to leave it here. Unless somebody can check it, it's their luggage. At any rate, many, many thanks to Rolf and to the St. Gallen Symposium, and thank you all again.